When you start any new thing, you're bound to make mistakes, and Warhammer 3 is no different. If only there was some way you could spot these mistakes early and avoid them to become a better player that much faster. Anyway, today we're counting down the top 10 noob mistakes in Total War Warhammer 3. Coming in 10th place we have not spending gold. This is one I know I've mentioned in previous videos, but I'm going to mention it again because it's just so important. In Warhammer 3, gold exists to be spent. Outside of paying for upkeep, there is no use for gold other than spending it, whether that means on settlements or on more units and armies. Now, later in the game, when you have millions of gold coming in per turn, you obviously can't spend it fast enough, and having a bunch of expensive armies sitting around becomes unnecessary. But in the earlier game, especially the first few turns, spending basically all the gold you have on cooldown is almost always the right thing to do. Obviously, you have to spend it on the right things, and this normally means on your army to get more units so you can continue to battle and expand and make more money. This can also mean investing in settlements to grow them to larger sizes, unlock higher tier units, and get a hold of more tradable resources to earn you even more gold. You have to spend that gold to make more. There's no interest rates in Warhammer 3, and the longer you sit on a big pile of it earlier on, the further behind you're going to fall. So, make like a 16-year-old getting their first paycheck, and as soon as that cash hits your bank account, search for something to burn it on as fast as possible, since chances are it'll massively benefit your campaign in the long run. Next up we have building settlements badly, and wouldn't you know it, spending all that gold on settlements is all well and good, but you need to make sure that you're building them well. Notice how I didn't say right, since there's not really a right or a wrong way, but there are things you can do to make sure you're getting the most out of your empire. First of all, anything unique in a region like a landmark or resource building you should basically always build. First of all, they're unique, so why not? You won't find them anywhere else. And second of all, they'll also offer unique benefits that again, you can't find anywhere else. Trade resources especially want to be built as quickly as possible, especially if you're a nation that can trade, since that'll increase your gold income exponentially if you continue to invest in it and make some allies. Outside of the unique stuff, it's a little bit more nuanced. For my starting region, I almost always go for recruiting, and this means building all the recruitment buildings I can with the lower tiers going into minor settlements to keep space open for extras in the higher tier settlements. I then adopt a chessboard system where the regions in each compass direction are economy focused before going back to recruitment. This ensures you're never too far away from recruitment in your own lands, but you can also have a crapload of gold coming in. You should also remember that it's okay to build something temporarily. Say if you're saving a spot for something that you only unlock at tier 4, why not fill that slot with something for growth or gold income while you wait? You can dismantle it later, and while yes, technically it is a waste of gold, you'll gain the benefit of that building for all that time you've had it, and either gain yourself a bit of side income or faster growth for that period, so it might just be worth it in the end. Finally, please build garrisons in all of your settlements. It might seem excessive, but the last thing you want is an unexpected war, and the enemy can just walk through all of your lands with not a single defense in sight. At the very least, have defenses on the borders of your empire to buy yourself some time, but if you want to be prepared, get them in every settlement for ultimate peace of mind. It can seem like a lot of gold for no return, but it is well worth it. Coming in 8th place we have refusing to use the save system. This is one that I know I will get a lot of grief for, but I will stand by this take until the day I die. The save system is there just for that, to save your game. Now yes, this does mean save your game so you can continue it later, but it can also mean to save a game that may have gone a little bit wrong by doing a bit of good old-fashioned save scumming, as it's called. Don't be put off by the name, I'm fully on board with save scumming. If I didn't start so many campaigns for this channel, I'd leave incremental autosaves on all the time, but my save folder is like 15 gigs, so I need to cool it. I highly encourage new players to leave on incremental autosaves, even if it's only for 5 or 10 turns. If you make a mistake and it results in a ruined campaign, then you can just roll back a few turns and you don't need to make the same mistake again. I mean, yeah, you can probably recover from that mistake eventually, but would you rather waste like 25 turns righting the wrongs, or just use time magic to make it so it never happened in the first place? What if it's a really terrible mistake in a crucial war, and your campaign might not have ended right there, but it's going to end in a few turns with no way to save it, especially for a newer player? Why have all that time invested into the campaign go to waste when you could simply just load a save and learn from your mistakes, because in the next campaign you'll be a lot more careful and eventually won't need to reload any saves so you can turn it off once you're comfortable enough. Don't let the haters get you down. If you're still learning the game, mistakes are going to happen, and loading a save to undo those mistakes is a totally fair thing to do. It's like drawing a nice picture in Photoshop. Oops, I accidentally dropped my pen and put a line across the entire picture. Do I A, painstakingly go through and erase the line and then build up the rest of my picture afterwards? B, start all over again, making the exact same picture as before but with no line? Or C, press undo? It's a pretty obvious answer here, so it's an obvious answer in game. This next one I'm specifically putting after the save system for good reason. Knowing what mistakes or setbacks are recoverable and not is the key to knowing when you need to reload a save and when a campaign is well and truly done so. So let's go through a few examples of something recoverable. Say you're in a war and the enemy takes a couple of your settlements. Yes, it is really annoying, especially if you've invested a bunch of gold into them, but I wouldn't call it unrecoverable unless they take your main settlement and all of your gold income is gone. You can take them back and push the enemy out of your lands using that momentum to take some of their lands in return. Let's say you complete a battle, win or lose, and your army takes a lot of casualties to the point it's going to basically be a fully new army by the time you're finished replenishing and recruiting. It can feel like that battle was far too costly, and yeah, you will spend a lot of time sorting yourself out after it. But as long as you hurt the enemy just as bad, if not worse, than they hurt you, you should be on level pegging to keep up the fight. Now some setbacks I would consider reloading if they happen to me. Losing your major settlement and going deep into the red gold-wise. Yeah, that's pretty devastating, especially if you don't have another region to fall back on for recruitment. Losing your strongest or even your only army is pretty bad, especially if you don't have gold to replace them fast. Having a lord or a hero die at level 19, 1 XP away from retirement. I don't care what's happening in the rest of my campaign. I'm not losing all the work I put into this lord no matter what. Isabella herself could offer me a trade deal of her ass for my face on the same turn and I'd still reload. But if Isabella is watching and wants to send me that trade deal, she can feel free. There's no real solid rules when a setback is damning. It all really depends on your skill level and how the campaign is going outside of just that setback. I would just advise newer players to think about it before quitting the campaign or loading a save to see if what's happened is really as bad as it seems. Coming in 6th place, we have one that I definitely do, which is auto-resolving far too much. If you've been in this channel for any length of time, you should know that I love auto-resolve. I find the turn-based part of the game much more enjoyable and relaxing than the real-time battles. It might just be because I'm a boomer with slow-ass reaction times, but I like to avoid manual battles as much as I possibly can and as often as I can get away with it. Just auto-resolve everything. Does this make me a noob? Don't answer that question unless you want to be contacted by my lawyer, but there are times when auto-resolving is just the wrong thing to do and manually battling will almost always be better. For example, if it's a close battle in auto-resolve, but you have a vastly more powerful army, you may as well manually fight to save yourself some units, especially if it's predicting you'll lose a lot of troops. The system we have in-game is not even close to perfect and will regularly underestimate your army, causing you to take many more casualties than you should and costing you time in the long run. I get wanting to avoid battles, especially on worse PC since it's 2 loading screens plus battle times, meaning you're normally looking at 15 to 20 minutes when you could just press auto-resolve and it'll take like 2 seconds. But if you think about it for a second, are you really saving time? Let's say you lose half your army in a battle that you could have saved manually fighting. Depending on what units they were, your recruitment capacity, you could be looking at several turns at stat recruiting and doing basically nothing when you could be continuing to fight and play. Now, all of this is assuming you can play manual battles to a passable degree, which admittedly takes some practice. But how are you ever going to get better if you're never doing it? I suppose you could call this 11 mistakes, since this one is kind of 2 in 1. Kicking off the top 5, we have putting units on the wrong settings. Speaking of battling, this is going to be a short one since it's a very easy fix, but it can still be a devastating mistake to make if you don't know you're doing it. In battle, units can be placed in a number of modes using the buttons along the bottom of the screen. For melee troops, the only option we have is guard mode, but for ranged, you have skirmishing and fire at will. Guard mode can be used on almost any unit in the game with the exception of super fast units. This will make it so your troops don't chase enemies to the ends of the earth if they retreat while being attacked, and it can save you having to pull your lines back together if some have slipped away. Fire at will can be left on most of the time, but there are cases when saving ammo for more valuable targets is the way to go, especially if you have ranged troops with very limited ammo pools. But by far the one that can cause the most trouble if used wrong is skirmish mode, and I believe by default it's enabled for all ranged troops. It causes ranged troops to flee when enemy units get too close, and initially this sounds like a good thing, but it doesn't take into account context. Say your ranged troops are right behind the melee troops. Well, once the lines clash, they're going to run away because enemies are nearby, even if they are totally safe. If they're about to be sandwiched and you need to move them towards your own troops, well, too bad, pathing is now bugged, so they're stood still because they're trying to run in 2 directions at once. And honestly, even if ranged troops are being flanked, at least keep them close to other troops. If enemies make it around your lines, skirmish can cause them to run into a more dangerous location away from your other units. So apart from very specific circumstance, I'd say to leave this off for everything. The only time to turn it on is when units are specifically skirmishers, and all that means is they can fire in any direction whilst moving, and even then, I'd only put them on it when they're not going to get sandwiched and you aren't micromanaging them. Otherwise, the pathing will still get them killed. Disable this by default and only switch it on when absolutely needed. Let's stick with something battle adjacent for a little while and talk about heroes. There are many kinds in game with mages, warriors and assassins, and when starting out it can be hard to know how to use each one. Sure, their actions are listed on the side of the screen, but that might as well be in Latin when you don't know what they do. My advice to newer players is to put everything but assassins into your armies, since 9 out of 10 times, you'll get more value out of them there without needing to worry about the complex intricacies of using them. Assassins are great in the campaign map, and by assassins I mean anything with the assassinate skill. This will allow them to take out enemy heroes outside of battles and can severely weaken enemy armies by taking out a key mage or frontlines leader. Other actions can be useful like weakening armies or garrisons before you attack for an easier battle, damaging walls to prepare for a siege, and even slowing down retreating armies by blocking their movement. Also, don't forget to use heroes as scouts to remove the fog of war, initiate diplomacy with far-off empires, and check if a route is safe before bringing in your army. But most of the time, sticking heroes into armies is a great use of their time, especially if they have any special skills like spells or buffs to your troops. Just take a read of each hero's actions and their skill tree before deciding what to do with them, and build their skills to make them better at that specific job. Coming into the top 3, we have making too many friends. This is something I know I for sure did when I was getting started because it seems like a great idea with no downsides, but trust me, it has plenty. Making allies is part of war, and I would recommend being friendly with a couple of factions in every campaign, especially if they're of the same faction. Who doesn't love a confederation? But the key is knowing when to pump the brakes on your relationship, and it's almost always right before defensive alliances. Everything up here is basically just a promise to make to each other to be best friends, but taking this next step is declaring to the world that you stand together versus anyone that comes against you. All that's going to happen from this kind of allegiance is anyone who declares war on your partner will also declare war on you, meaning you're going to end up in twice as many wars as you usually would, without much of an upside. Now, in theory, you and your ally are meant to be defending each other and working together on wars, but the AI works in mysterious ways, and by mysterious, I of course mean broken. The bottom line is, they won't really help you, so you're just in a load of wars you could have easily avoided. Going all the way to military lines makes it even worse. Then you're going to get dragged into wars that they start as well as those started on them. Avoid alliances until you're well into the endgame and need to join a Giga alliance to stay alive. They'll only bring you trouble until then. Staying in the world of diplomacy, we have a stat that, as far as I remember, isn't really ever explained, but can basically nuke your campaign from a diplomatic point of view if you happen to mess it up. Reliability is shown under your faction leader's portrait, and all it really means is how trustworthy the rest of the factions in the game see you. This translates to how likely they are to accept to deal with you, with a lower reliability resulting in worse chances. This stat is naturally built up over time and starts off at the max. You lose it by breaking treaties and performing other acts which could be considered untrustworthy. Say you declare war on a faction without first removing your non-aggression pact and wait a few turns, or you decline to join an ally's war and dissolve your alliance. It doesn't take much and is easily done accidentally early on, but once it's done, your diplomatic game, it takes a massive hit, with it basically impossible to get any deals through until it's resolved, and the only way to resolve it is to have long-standing deals. If you're playing as a faction that doesn't really get involved in diplomacy, it's not too bad, but basically any good faction, you're pretty badly nuking your game for a good few turns, and you may not even know that you're doing it. And finally, in first place, we have choosing the wrong faction. Speaking of which faction you're playing as, this can have a serious impact on how much you enjoy your campaign, since not all of them are created equally, especially in how hard they are to get to grips with. It's not even like stronger factions are easy to play. I rate the Skaven as the strongest faction in the game, but they can be one of the most challenging factions in the game when you're first getting started, since they just have so many things to stay on top of. I think that choosing the wrong faction or even campaign to play is the #1 reason why people get sickened off from the game or go for a refund if they can. These days we have the prologue campaign and that'll ease you into things, but if you want to hop straight into Immortal Empires, first of all, there are too many factions to choose from, so just making that decision can be a challenge in itself. Secondly, there are a handful of factions that have vastly better picks when you're first getting started. My go-to has always been Tyrion from the High Elves since he's basic and strong, while still dipping your toe into the fantasy elements of the game. Thorgrim is also great since dwarves are very easy to play in battle, and he's probably the best start out of all of them for an easier campaign, and if you're desperate to dip your toes into evil, then the easiest is probably Noctilus from the Vampire Coast, but he still has quite a few things to stay on top of, so stick to order until you're more comfortable. And finally, a bonus tip: commit to a campaign playing about 100 turns or so until you find your feet. I played a bunch of Warhammer campaigns before I finished my first Vortex campaign as Tyrion. Once I did that, it all made sense and I was far more comfortable playing other factions, and now I had a decent understanding of how the game works from the start all the way to the end. These are some fairly complex games with a learning curve, but you do climb it eventually, so choose someone simple and keep at it. Don't worry, you'll be dropping nukes as a kit in no time. And that's my list. If you have anything that you think should have made it, then leave it down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know which things Warhammer 3 players absolutely hate, then check out this video here to see the top 10.